Hi, welcome back everyone. Good to see so many of you here. This is a session around integrating AI into your learning strategy. And I'm guessing that some of you have been involved in other sessions that we've talked about AI over the course of the yesterday and earlier today. And if that's the case, then the chances are that you've already heard Egle Vinauskaite's name, because I think she's probably been one of the most referenced people in the sessions that we've been talking around in terms of people you need to keep an eye on if you are interested in what's happening in the world of AI, what's happening specifically around the world with AI and learning and development. So as learning strategy for nodes, Egle is on LinkedIn, posting stuff which I have to say I find not only really, really useful, but really, really clear. And believe me, there's a lot of stuff talked about AI and learning strategy, which is neither of the above. So this is an incredible opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Egle Vinauskaite to the World of Learning Summit. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. That's very kind. So hello, everyone. My name is Egle Vinauskaite. I'm a learning strategist and director of Nodes, a learning innovation consultancy. And I work at the intersection between learning and technology. And I guess I'm not going to surprise anyone if I say that AI has been the technology in this field for the last year. But here's what I observed working with various technologies and learning over the years that were supposed to revolutionize learning. We had virtual reality, we had the metaverse, we had gamification, if you remember that. We also, as an industry, we went through the phase of Netflix for learning some time ago. And what I observed with each of these technologies was that once the initial awe about the technology wears off, then people start asking questions. So how do I use it exactly? How do I get the benefits that people keep talking about? And there has been a lot of awe around AI in the past year, and we are just about reaching a point where learning professionals like yourselves are asking the question of, so what does that mean for me exactly? How do I make it work? How do I use it? Where do I get started? So on that note, welcome to integrating AI into your learning strategy. I'm going to talk about 3 things, and I'm going to suggest answers to 3 questions. Are you ready in your organization, in your function, in your learning department? How do you get started? And how can you do it safely? So I don't want to ask this question anymore, because Detlef asked this question yesterday, and probably 80-90% of the room raised their hands. However, I want to ask this question. How many of you are using AI in your organization? And I mean not as a little helper in the back pocket, but using organizations, sanctioned AI as part of your official duties. Raise your hands, please. Okay. That's what I was expecting. It's something like 25%. And from my conversations with various learning professionals over the last year, here's pretty much the general sentiment, that when we talk about how do we use this little nice EdTech AI-powered app to play a little game, it's all cute, but when we start talking about, okay, so how does that work in an organizational environment with the security requirements, with the responsibility that you have as an organization to treat data and to make decisions responsibly, it's a bit of an Oppenheimer feel. So before we talk about AI, I want to get all of us on the same page about what AI can and cannot do. And this flowchart, this decision tree, I've borrowed it from James Smith. You can actually find a bigger version of it on my LinkedIn. James Smith is head of AI products at Google, and he was delivering a presentation at a product conference. And I asked him if I can use this decision tree and if I can replace ML with AI, because in the original graphic it was, should I use ML? And the answers were, don't use or can try using ML. So for our purposes, AI is going to do. So there are 5 questions that are going to help you think through this, think through your ideas of using AI for one use case or another. The first one is, do I have data that is suitable to power an AI solution? Because if you think about the more sophisticated and strategic uses of generative AI in learning that go beyond write me a little script, it needs data. It needs data on how your people learn, how your people engage and where they drop off. It needs data on what are the outcomes. It needs data on how people are engaging with your tech ecosystem, or at least your learning tech ecosystem in general. So AI is not going to produce any miracles if you do not feed it anything that is useful. The second question is, do you have a problem that can't be solved with pre-programmed rules? Because the truth is that AI introduces a lot of complexity. And if you have a use case where you can use a string of if-then statements, if this, then that, if this, then that, even if you have 50 of them, that is an easier, more reliable, less complex solution than using AI for that problem. The third question is, does my product require personalization? Meaning, do I want every user of my product to have a different version of that experience, of that content? And I would say that in learning, that's probably what we're going for to a large extent. We want to use AI to personalize learning and to make it relevant to everyone, and therefore increase engagement and so on and so forth. So yeah, I would say it is in many cases a yes. The fourth question is, are users comfortable not knowing exactly how a product functions? Because it is about this black box that produces answers, produces responses, produces content, and we don't quite know where that content is coming from and why it looks the way it does. So are your users comfortable not knowing exactly how a product functions? Again, speaking from representing L&D here, I would say that we are not making life and death decisions. We are not making investment decisions. We are not doing medical diagnostics. But if there is a future where we do someone thinks of some generative AI-powered performance support for airline pilots to replace their little rule book, then I would say that, yeah, probably I'm not very comfortable not knowing how that product functions. I would take the little instruction manual. And the final question is, will users tolerate errors in the product? Because the reality of ML is, of large language models, just the way they work, is that there is always a margin for error. Something is going to go wrong, or if not wrong, let's say, is going to eventually, if you use it long enough, is going to say something weird. So a question for you is, are your users going to tolerate it saying something weird? Is that going to cause, are you using it in a context where it can cause reputational damage, where it can cause some compliance breach because it says something inappropriate? And I would say that a lot of the hilarity that you see in the press of customer success bots producing, pretty much cursing at the customers, cursing out the company, is because the companies assumed that there are not going to be any errors, and they used AI in a context where users really do not tolerate errors in the product. So if it's a no, or if any of these is a no, then don't use AI. If it's a yes, then maybe try AI. So this is, hopefully this gets us on the same page about what AI can and cannot do. But when we talk about AI in learning, it's not just AI. Yes, we have AI. Yes, we need to understand how this technology works, what are the good use cases, what it can and cannot be used for. But there is also learning. learning, which is understanding how people learn, because only when we understand the process of learning and the process of learning in organizations and organizational learning specifically, only then can we start imagining how we can use AI in a meaningful context. And finally, and this is something that we don't talk about enough, is organizational context. Because when you think about integrating AI into your learning strategy, you need to take into account what is your culture in the organization, what is your appetite for change, what is your appetite for risk, what is your appetite for innovation. Then think about what kind of technology stack you're working with. What is the level of and what is the quality of your data infrastructure? And finally, ultimately, thinking about your learning strategy and business strategy and learning strategy that supports the business strategy, whether it is, if there are even meaningful use cases to integrate AI in the first place. So with that in mind, all of this was an intro, by the way. So now we get to the first part of it, is, are you ready to use AI in your organization? And let's start from the top, which is business strategy. And I'm starting with it because, let's be honest here, L&D is not the department in an organization that decides whether the organization needs to use AI. It is a decision made at the very top of the company, and L&D is only a beneficiary in most cases. I don't know if there are any other cases. I haven't met an L&D leader who's leading the AI adoption in an organization. So that's the first. Then the second step, that okay, so our organization supports this, the strategy is open to us using AI. The second one, do I actually have meaningful AI use cases? Is there actual need for me? Are there specific problems that I'm mulling over that AI can benefit in solving? So, okay, so I have good use cases. I know kinda how I want to use AI. The next question is, do I have the technology? At the very least, the basic version of this question is, do I have access to, say, GPT-4? Do I have access to it in a way that is secure, in an isolated instance for your company? What kind of other technologies do I have? Because obviously the bigger the organization, the bigger the tech stack, what kind of technologies am I even working with to start thinking about how to solve these use cases? Once I have the technology, now that's the uncomfortable question. Do I have the data to actually use this technology in a way that can help me fulfill the use cases? And then if I have the data, if I have the technology, all is almost set up. Do I know how to use it? Are there policies in my organization about how to use and how not to use AI? And this is something that actually came up in mine and Don Taylor's survey several months back, where yes, when we asked people about the blockers in implementing AI, a lot of people said that our organization prevents us and prohibits us from using AI. However, there was quite a chunk of people who said that our organization, it's about the lack of clarity. We don't know if our organization permits or prohibits, and therefore we're not using it, or we don't really know how, we don't know how much we can push. We don't want to do anything, we don't want to put a foot wrong, so we're not going to experiment with it, and we're not going to see how we can use it. And once you have all of these in place, then the final component is people. Do you have the people who know how to use the data and the technology and how to exploit these use cases and make it work for you? So If all of these are a yes, or at least you're aware of them and you're working on fixing them, then we can go to the next question, which is, so how do you get started? And another way of looking at this question is to think about how do we move from AI is cool to AI is actually useful for us. And here's the thing, that when you start thinking about implementing AI realistically, it is quite an expensive endeavor. It may not seem like it, but when you have thousands or tens of thousands of users, it requires a significant budget. And at that point, you need to make a business case for it. And this is something that a lot of learning professionals that I've spoken with that are serious about using AI, for them, now the question on their minds is, how do I make a business case for it and make it actually show that it can be useful? So I am proposing a 3-step framework. Understand where you are, identify your goals with AI, and find your own use cases for AI. So step number 1 is start with a systems and tools audit. Understand what you currently have in your organization that you can work with. It might be that some of the tools that your teams are using already have AI integrated into them. So for example, Canva, Photoshop, Vimeo has AI video editing, things like that. Understand what is available to you, what kind of licenses you have. The second one is understand your processes, your key processes that get the job done, so you know what people actually do, so that in the next step you can start thinking about where AI could fit into those processes. The third one is understand the level of skills and knowledge in your team. At this point, just so you know what you're working with. Then, look at the existing use cases, because chances are, unless your organization is super strict about using AI, your people are already using AI and they are inventing their own use cases, so just source them, start collating them, and start distributing them across the team and sharing that knowledge. And finally, create or clarify AI use policies. And here's another thing, that in many cases, I would say that they might come from the business. So a matter, probably the step for L&D to take realistically is to see what the business is thinking about AI use policies. And if there is nothing, then probably a little nudge that we kind of need to get started on them. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is identify your goals with AI. So the first one here is go over your team KPIs and challenges. You know what your KPIs are. You probably know what causes you most pain in your team. So what are your key challenges? So just list them. Create a laundry list of the things that are important to you and your team, either officially or unofficially. The second step is prioritize them. Look at the problems that, if you solve them, would pretty much the low-hanging fruit, would create the most value for the least amount of effort. Then look at once you have these problems, look at the tasks that solving these problems might involve, and identify the tasks that you can potentially support with AI. And this is an important point, because AI is not necessarily good to create an entire chunk of work, but it is good at very defined tasks. So break it down into tasks, look at which tasks you can support with AI, and finally set up simple experiments. And these experiments can be something like, I'm going to be using AI for this task for a week, and at the end of the week I'll see how much time I saved, that sort of thing. And the final step is find your own use cases for AI. Ask yourself some questions. What tools are proving useful from our experimentation, from the tools that the team have already been using? What tasks, what tools, these tools, what tasks are they good for? Who is using them really well? investigate, poke this a little bit. What makes that use case for that person work so well? Now, what can you adapt from other departments? Because everyone is experimenting. In L&D here, we're obviously quite nervous about what it's going to do to our profession, how it's going to change business, how it's going to change L&D operations. But if you tap into LinkedIn feeds of other professions, for example, marketing, the same thing is going on. Everyone's trying to figure this out. So can you perhaps have a chat with your friends in marketing and see what they're using for asset creation, for content creation, for analysis, that sort of thing? Perhaps you can collaborate and split some budget or do some experiments that could work for both of you. Once you've done that, address knowledge, skill, and mindset gaps in your teams. And I think it's important, especially the mindset gap. It is about what's blocking people from using AI. Is it fear? Is it indifference? Is it a lack of urgency? Is it intimidation, lack of confidence, things like that? Because it's not just, personally, I don't think about it as a case of, okay, so we need to upskill people. It is a case of taking people on a journey with you, and making sure that everyone can participate in this discovery process. Because you don't want just the first adopters, you don't want just the advocates using AI. You want people who are perhaps a bit skeptical. And the truth about AI is that it is only as good as the human ingenuity behind it. It's only as good as the person thinking about, where do I aim this AI, what kind of problem I want to solve, how can I potentially use AI to solve that problem. So you want as many human brains on it as possible. So unlock this. And finally, do some exercises perhaps to discover use cases with your team. And here are the 3 types that I've seen roughly that companies do. So the first one is workshops. So we get together for 2-3 hours. It's a facilitated session where people are sharing ideas, people are sharing their personal learnings from their experiments with AI, that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a one-off ad hoc. Challenges, which is quite an interesting solution where you set out a challenge for your team that, for example, so this is the problem that we want to tackle. Say the 5 of us, we're going to go away for a month, and we're going to experiment how we can use AI to work on that challenge, and then we're going to reconvene in a month, get a little meeting, debrief, see what worked, see what didn't work, that sort of thing. So it's asynchronous, requires much less time than, say, a hackathon, which is very time intensive. You're taking people away from their desks for 1 or 2 full days. However, one reason that some companies find it worth it is because you have people from different functions mingling in these hackathons, which enables knowledge sharing, and it also enables actual building of solutions that you can just come out of the hackathon and start testing and implementing and seeing if they work, if there are savings, and so on. So these are the 3. Understand where you are, identify your goals with AI, and find your own use cases for AI. Now, a few words of caution here, something that I alluded to, but I want to make explicit. First, it is very important to start with a problem. AI is the kind of universal technology, which is really objectively quite powerful, that you can really point it and tell it to solve various problems. And if you start solving the wrong problem with a very powerful technology, you're going to go way in the wrong direction. So specifically here, one thing I'm referring to is thinking about, like, the initial instinct for a lot of people in learning is to use AI to create more content, to optimize the content creation process. And obviously there are really good use cases for that. But it is worth stopping, taking a step back, and thinking that now that we have this technology, do we need content on, say, like first-time manager having a difficult conversation type thing? Do we need videos for it? Do we need to create content with the steps for it? Or do we use AI to create a simulation so that people can actually start building skills? So it's one of these questions where we ask what kind of problem we want to solve. And another one is don't scale what hasn't worked. So this is exactly what I just said. So the final one. Okay, still 15 minutes. How to integrate AI safely. And there are a lot of conversation about this for a good reason, because we're in a people profession. Our work and how we use technology matters. And I find this a bit of a huge blob about various that relates to various considerations. So I find it useful when I think about it to break it down into 3 areas. So this is my breakdown. This is not science. Privacy, bias, and ethics. So with privacy, the question is, are we safe? So we're using either proprietary company information when we're developing content potentially. At a more advanced stage, we might be using some data that that contains some potentially sensitive personal information. Is that safe? Is it first of all, is the container safe? Are we well protected from data breaches? And then if we think about these applications that actually plug into your company information, that, for example, assistants, the question is, doesn't that information stay safe from being released into the world? Is it being used to train the model again? So these are the considerations that relate to privacy. The second one is bias. Are we fair? Because there's a lot of talk about using AI to, for example, polish content recommendations or create career paths, that sort of thing. And this is good. This can be really helpful. However, it is important to keep an eye on whether these applications are acting in a, well, they're not acting themselves, whether they work in a fair way, because the reality is that there are only so many opportunities, there are only so many spots on this learning program, high potentials or whatever, or any learning program. There are only so many people who can get to that position in an organization, to like director or head of learning level. And so that opportunity is going to have to be rationed. So how do we make sure that people do not get, that everyone has a fair chance using these algorithms that are that can be quite opaque? That how do we ensure that these recommendations they do not affect certain groups of people in a worse way? And the final one is ethics. The bigger general question of should we? AI can potentially, there is definitely a future where AI can be used to predict who is likely to underperform, who should get promoted, who should get hired, these kind of decisions that affect people's lives. And the question is, if AI can potentially give us an insight into these things, should we look? And if we are looking, what kind of guardrails we're putting around it, and what kind of consent are we getting from people, and what is our responsibility to the people whose data, whose entire interaction with a company's tech ecosystem is going to be analyzed in a very different way using AI. So, speaking of guardrails, these are my suggestions. The first one is vendor management. That's the first thing that you can do on your path to responsible adoption of AI. Vendor management, what I mean by that, there are a few facets. The first one is make sure that you work with vendors that have in-house AI expertise, that actually know machine learning, that they are not just mounting something on something that don't quite understand. Make sure that your vendors have experience working in enterprise settings, because there are little Very interesting AI products, edtech, AI and edtech products, but their teams, they are usually B2C. They know how to create apps, but they may not know the security requirements of in an enterprise setting. And make sure that the vendors that you work with, they are committed to ethical use of AI, and perhaps consider adding that as a contractual term as well, adding it in your contracts about their responsibility to ensure ethical use of AI, what they're doing to prevent biases, to check their models, and so on. The second one is comms and training. I think here with training, we talked about that before, and we talked about policies, but here it is important that you don't just have a policy, but that policy is well communicated, that people who are using AI are actually aware of how they should and should not be using AI. So don't forget that. Policy is not just this thing in the background. People are going to be using, unlike a lot of other compliance things that they might be encountering once a year or once every few months, likely they will be using AI in very creative and tested ways every day. They need to know what the size of the sandbox is. Bias monitoring, a few things to say here. First, AI is, for example, thinking about ChatGPT and the underlying GPT models, they are trained on a Western biased data sets, which means that if you're purely relying for some, say, more culturally sensitive topics, they might, without any fine-tuning, they might not be the most accurate ones. Also, keep in mind that there are some things that you can do in your organization. So there's a smaller thing and a bigger thing. So I'm going to start with the easier one. So that is creating some sort of a feedback loop. It can be either an inbox, like the easiest way, the easiest thing you can do is create an inbox where people can submit their when they perceive that AI is acting and AI's output is a bit biased or there's something quite off, so that they can submit these things so you can investigate. And another good practice is that if you are deploying AI in any way, you just ask people to break it and submit what happens, submit the output, submit the what you're observing. And the more complicated thing that you would need to do here is to monitor outcomes for different groups. So if you're using AI for whatever learning thing, and at the end of a period, say half a year or a year, you look into how that affected the outcomes of various groups. Perhaps one group was promoted at an unproportionate level in the organization. That means that there is something in the model potentially that might be a bit biased, that is not contributing all groups in an equitable way. The other one is consent. We talked about that. It is about being transparent about how data is being used and asking people's consent about whether they want their data to be used in that way. I think that's going to be a bit of a can of worms in the next year and in the coming years, but something to keep in mind. And the final one is using, always having a human in the loop, because we have to reckon with the reality that we, in learning, either work with people's data or we work on programs or on solutions or products that affect people's outcomes. The resources that we create, the upskilling opportunities that we create, they affect how well people are going to be able to learn the skills to advance in their job and so on. So it matters. It matters. The decisions that we use AI to help us make, they actually have real-world consequences, which means that you don't want to leave them up to AI without any oversight. So making sure that your processes have a human in the loop. So a few final words, just in time. Organizational context determines if what you read about AI and learning apply to you. AI adoption starts from the top. Your technology, data, policies, and people capabilities are the levers that you can pull determine and to affect how well you integrate AI into your strategy. And high-value use cases lead to high-value outcomes. Know your most valuable problems that you can solve with AI. So I think that is it, and we have 5 minutes. I'm very proud of myself. This is me, and this is my LinkedIn profile if you want more of what you got here.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Egle Vinauskaite.